But let's therefore turn to first our big budget face-off. Is this a feel-good budget, as some are calling it, or a missed opportunity? Can this be the budget that spurs investment? Is there really enough for the Aam Aadmi? What are the risk factors? Can India weather global headwinds in the next 12 months? Joining me now, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Congress MP, and Baijan Panda, National Vice President of the BJP and former MP, two of the most articulate voices that we have in Indian politics. Appreciate both of you joining us. Let's turn to the opposition for a moment, since they often claim they don't get enough of a voice. Dr. Tharoor, are you going to go along with what Udayan Mukherjee and a lot of analysts are saying today? This was a relatively credible, solid budget that has ensured an element of fiscal consolidation.
Look, I mean, you call it a Rahul Dravid budget, and I can see some of the merits in that, but it's also sometimes, in some ways, a hit or miss budget. So you can find your least favorite cricketer and put his name to it too, because the truth is that if you look at some of these issues, the first thing that occurred to me as I heard the budget was there was no mention of Manrega, and the slashing of Manrega to a record low of 60,000 crores. At a time when experts, just judging by demand, which is up since the pandemic, are saying that it needs 1.4 lakh crores. And last year, the finance minister had to come back to Parliament with supplementary demands for grants because the higher amount that she'd allocated didn't prove enough. It seems to me absolutely incomprehensible that they would then slash Manrega down to such a record low number. Similarly, very, very big concern about unemployment, which was not specifically addressed. The word, in fact, was not used. We have a 16-month high, as you know, in unemployment figures in India today. We're also facing record levels of youth unemployment. Nationally, it's at 16%. In some states, my own state of Kerala, it's at 40%. And there's some real worries about what we can do to absorb our young people. And then while there's talk of some tax relief, there's some confusion about what that tax relief really means, because most people were actually getting more than 7 lakhs to write off when they had the old tax regime system, because it was 5, but they had various other allocations, house rent allowance and insurance and so on and so forth, that they could take off. So it came to 7.7 lakhs, whereas right now they're only going to get 7 off under the new system. So there are some real questions about all this. And finally, the question is, while infrastructure expenditure is great, and it's good to see so much coming into railways and into highways and all of that, what's it coming at the expense of? And if you look at the budget carefully, they've slashed Manrega, as I've said. They've also slashed allocations to women and child development, the integrated child development scheme. The Ministry for Minorities is being slashed. The Ministry for Labour has been slashed. And our defense ministry has had a very marginal increase for capital outlay, which doesn't even match the rate of inflation. So the priorities of the government, what they've chosen to spend money on, is fairly clear, and no doubt they'll get applause for it. But the issues of what they haven't spent money on, allocated money on, still remains to be worried about.
Okay, so Jai Panda, net what Dr. Tharoor seems to be suggesting is that a number of those who have been distressed, particularly during the pandemic years and even today post-pandemic, their concerns haven't been adequately addressed. He mentioned Manrega, he mentioned the fact that the FM did not speak about the unorganized sector, unemployed, youth in particular. Respond to what you're hearing.
First of all, Rajdeep, I think it's unfair and stingy to call this budget only a solid budget, because it is rather spectacular. I mean, just look on the infrastructure front itself, 33% rise in allocation to 10 lakh crores, and it's not a one-off. In the last 3 years, from the pandemic affected lows, we've had 3.5 lakh crore for capex 3 years ago, 5.5 lakh crores 2 years ago, 7.5 lakh crores in this current year, and now in this budget, 10 lakh crores. And it's not as if that's not getting implemented. Every year, this money has been almost entirely implemented. And that is spectacular. This is one of the reasons that the world is looking to India, as the IMF calls it, as a shining light in the global economy. Now, it's also incorrect to say that it doesn't take care of sections of society, because every single section has been taken care of. Take, for example, 20 lakh crores credit guarantee scheme for agriculture. Take, for example, 157 new nursing schools. This budget has the highest ever allocation for health, health sector, highest ever allocation for the education sector. Now, Shashi, of course, has otherwise been gracious about some aspects of the budget. He does have a pet peeve about Manrega, and I want to point out to your viewers that Manrega is a demand-driven scheme. So whatever the demand is, it will be made up, as was made up last year, like he said. But the reality is that there's such massive investment going on that the same people who would have needed Manrega in a crisis are actually getting jobs from other ways. For example, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana has gone up to a massive 80,000 crores. Now, who's going to build these rural houses? The same people who would have otherwise needed to take help for Manrega. Now, the track record of this government under Prime Minister Modi, and first under the late Arun Jaitley and now under Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji, is phenomenal management of fiscal prudence. Now, you look at what has happened post-pandemic to even developed nations. Look at inflation in those nations. Look at the fiscal deficit in those nations, and how well India has managed this. And that's why India is getting all these plaudits. And it's not correct to say that there's no reference to jobs. How do jobs come about? Jobs come about through these investments and through these various schemes. And it is reflected in the jobs data that is out there.
Okay,
I just want to point out, Rajiv, just one thing,
one
thing. 1 million jobs are being created every month for the last several months. This has been the holy grail for India. And 900,000 EPFO registrations are taking place every month. You can't just turn a blind eye to that.
There are contrasting numbers on those unemployment figures, Jai Panda. CMIE has its own figures, government turns to EPFO figures. We can dispute that. But the fact is, and I'll let you start this time and then let Dr. Tharoor respond. Despite that capex outlay last year, we saw that there wasn't a virtuous cycle of growth, of investment, of job creation. Private investment still seemed reluctant to put their money where the government hoped they would. And there is a concern that they still might not. There are global headwinds out there. There's a possibility of recession later this year. Is that something that the government countenances for? That, they seem to believe we are in a virtuous cycle of growth, investment, job creation. That's not happened so far in the last few years. Forget about the pandemic, but even post-pandemic, it's still not here. Will this budget trigger those animal spirits?
You are speaking, you referred to two things which are important. You referred to global headwinds. And as I said, India has weathered the global headwinds better than anybody else. I mean, just look at our neighborhood, look at other developed countries around the world. You referred to the lower level of private sector investment. Now, that's not a new thing. That's been an issue for now several decades in India. Now, to make up for that, the government has put in enormous public investment to get this economy to the level where it is. Now, today, we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. We are the 5th largest in the world, whereas when this government started, we were the 10th largest in the world. So we have come up quite a bit. We have, as I already mentioned earlier, better track record of managing the fiscal deficit and managing inflation than almost any other nation in the world. Now, you can't say that the animal spirits haven't been ignited. Look at the startup sector. Despite some of the recent difficulties, now India today is the 3rd largest platform for the startup sector. These are creating jobs. I refer to the jobs which have been created. It doesn't happen just like that. Let
Dr. Tharoor respond to what you are saying, that Dr. Tharoor, Jai Panda and a number of people in government say, despite the difficult times that the world has gone through in the last few years, India, and this is not just the government saying it, but even international agencies saying it, India is the fastest growing economy at the moment in the world, albeit at times on a lower base, but the fact is it is, and the fact is, according to international global agencies, it is a shining light. How do you respond to that? That the fact is our inflation is relatively lower compared to other countries, we haven't slipped into recession, so many of the doomsdayers have been proven wrong.
Well, look, let's understand what this means, right? We're talking about growing at perhaps 6.5%. I might add 7% this year, but don't forget the first 6 months of this year, we grew at 9.7%. So to end up at 7% over the year means that the second 6 months of this year, we're going to be growing at something like 4.5% or under. So the overall is coming at 7, which means the pace is slowing down, despite the higher capex expenditure that Jai Panda and the government talk about with such pride. Secondly, the capex expenditure has not always been completely allocated. So last year, there were 22,000 crores they didn't spend of the money they allocated. So if they suddenly increase by another 2.5 lakh crores, are they going to be able to spend all that money? It remains to be seen. Thirdly, I've given you the unemployment figures at the beginning of our conversation. An increase in GDP does not necessarily correlate to an increase in employment, because a lot of our growth has been jobless growth or relatively job-light growth. In the 70s, 1% of GDP meant 2 lakh jobs. Today, it just doesn't anymore. And therefore, we really have to ask ourselves, how many jobs is the government going to create in order to absorb the rather large numbers of unemployed young people who will need to be absorbed, because obviously it's a national priority for us to make sure there are things to do. Now, at the same time, there are some real questions which we haven't had answers to about how the government exactly intends to keep to these numbers. They've actually announced targets every year that they fail to meet, whether it's about the fiscal deficit, whether it's about other things. And I heard Ray Mukherjee say that the fiscal deficit calculations are based on reasonable assumptions, and I'll take his word for it. But we'll have to see them matching it. Don't forget that they had pledged to come down to 4.5%. They're now talking about coming down to 5.9 the following year, which is still a long way away from 4.5. I don't want to be really singing a song of doom, because I'm an Indian too. I want my economy to flourish. I want my country to succeed. But there are some real questions. I don't think the tax benefits are going to be remotely as exciting when people parse the numbers and they realize that under the existing tax regime, they have more exemptions than they will under the new one. And in any case, any money they save is going to be consumed in inflation, because essential commodities prices have continued to go up. Transfers to states are going to go down. A lot of the state governments are going to be squealing in the next couple of days. You can be sure of that, because what was promised is not what is coming out of this budget numbers. So we are looking at some real concerns. Even the capex, a lot of the capex, frankly, is that instead of giving grants to the states, you're giving them interest-free loans. Okay, I've heard Jay talk about how important it is a 50-year interest-free loan, but a loan is still a loan. A grant can actually be spent without having to worry about paying it back. And many of these state governments are pretty broke themselves.
I've got many more voices joining me in a moment, but I'll give Jai Panda the final word. Jai Panda, if you were to summarize this budget for us in 30 seconds, what, according to you, makes it stand out? You said it's spectacular, a word that I've not been using. I've been using the word solid. What about this budget makes it spectacular? 30 seconds.
I already told you 33% increase in infrastructure allocation, and it's not as if it's not being spent. I explained to you that in 3 years it's gone from 3.5 lakh crores to 5.5 lakh crores, 7.5 lakh crores, and now 10 lakh crores. The track record is there for all to see. 90 million households have been connected with drinking water. 12 crore households have been connected with toilets. Nearly 10 crore LPG connections. The opposition has always been skeptical, cynical, and sometimes downright obstructive. They have obstructed GST. They have called it all sorts of names. It's giving us 1,50,000 crores revenue every month. They made fun about Jan Dhan accounts when they were first opened, but the JAM trilogy has made this transformation possible. They made fun of the vaccine initiatives. India is hailed as the world's vaccine supplier, not the largest ever, the fastest ever vaccination campaign, but also helps dozens of other countries. This, to sum up, this budget is not just for 2024. This budget is the groundwork for 2047. This is the first budget of Amrit Kal, and India is shining.
I was waiting for the word Amrit Kal to be used. It was the word most used by the FM as well. But Jai Panda and Shashi Tharoor, for giving us two contrasting perspectives in such an articulate manner. I appreciate both of you joining me here on this budget special. Thank you very much.